Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. At UFC 292, Aljamain Sterling versus Sean O'Malley. We learned a lot about all the different fighters on the card, and this is going to be my top 3 takeaways from UFC 292. I'm going to start with a couple honorable mentions, which I will briefly discuss, and then I'm going to go from 3 to 1 with my takeaways in order of importance. And the number one takeaway, I think some people already really knew, and in the back of my mind, I kind of already knew as well, but it was very apparent at UFC 292. We're going to talk about that later in the video. But starting off with the first honorable mention. I forgot to discuss this in my post-fight, so I wanted to include it in a video. So I figured I'd include it in the honorable mention in the takeaways video. But usually I don't like certain moments that are kind of dramatized, the manufacture hype. And I don't think this was one of those moments, but it almost kind of looked like one of those moments. I absolutely loved the pre-fight stare down between Sean O'Malley and Aljamain Sterling, where Bruce Buffer was announcing they both came to the center, were staring each other down right before the fight. That's an iconic moment in MMA history. You know, that was a moment where it really made you excited for the fight. It wasn't one of these weird, corny stare downs post-fight after somebody just got done fighting and somebody comes out of the crowd and now they're manufacturing drama for a fight months away. This is two guys at the top of their division getting ready to fight for a championship, and they're just staring each other down right as Bruce Buffer is announcing them. I wanted to discuss that briefly. I thought that was an awesome moment at UFC 292, and one of my favorite moments at UFC 292. Moving on to my next honorable mention, and this one was actually pretty shocking to me. Tony Kelly didn't use any racial slurs at UFC 292. For those of you who don't know, Tony Kelly is a former UFC fighter. He is the boyfriend or fiance or husband of Andrea Lee. I don't remember exactly what their relationship status is, but he's basically a known racist. He said some questionable comments on air before. He's posted some questionable stuff online. And I really thought when they were showing the corner advice for Andrea Lee, I'm like, all right, Tony Kelly's getting ready to throw out the N-word with the hard R. Tony Kelly's getting ready to say something that just rubs people the wrong way. I kept waiting for it. And it never happened. That was shocking to me that Tony Kelly was on air, had some airtime at UFC 292, and didn't make some massive gaffe where he said something he shouldn't. So I thought that was interesting, and I wanted to include it in the takeaways video as an honorable mention. Also, another honorable mention, this one doesn't really mean all that much. I did not know that Sean O'Malley was from Montana. I'm just finding that out. Maybe a lot of you guys knew it already. Maybe I'm a casual. Who knew that Sean O'Malley was from Montana? I did not know that. So Montana, I'm assuming, has their first UFC champion. Not 100% sure on that, but thought it was interesting. I figured I would include it in this video. And then the last honorable mention, which this is a more serious honorable mention, and that is that Aljamain Sterling will never sniff a UFC title shot ever again. And I know a lot of people are wondering, like, how is that possible? He's a former champion, arguably the bantamweight GOAT, defended his belt multiple times in the bantamweight division, got clipped in a fight where he won the first round, and maybe there could be an immediate rematch. The UFC and Dana White hate Aljamain Sterling's guts. They look at him as non-promotable. They look at him as dead weight. And they wanted him desperately to lose that title. They wanted Sean O'Malley to win at UFC 292. That's why they set Aljamain Sterling up for failure. They made him have a 3-month turnaround after a 5-round hard-fought fight against Henry Cejudo at UFC 288, and they know he cuts a lot of weight. So they knew making him turn around that quickly. Meanwhile, Sean O'Malley sat out for 10 months preparing to fight Aljamain Sterling. They knew it would significantly benefit Sean O'Malley and be a significant detriment to Aljamain Sterling. And I honestly believe Dana, you could see the joy on his face right after he wrapped the belt around Sean O'Malley. He was smiling ear to ear, but he was almost trying to hide it. He was overjoyed. He was a kid on Christmas. And now in Dana White's mind, in the UFC's mind, it's crisis averted. We got rid of this unwanted champion. The fans didn't like him. He's not promotable. He had all these questionable wins in people's minds, and he's super unlikable. And rather than trying to promote him and get him to lean into that, which he recently started leaning into that hate, the UFC just was like, I don't want him anymore. We don't want him. We got to get rid of him. We got to get somebody to defeat him. We got to set him up for failure. And now that they have rid themselves of him as a champion, I don't think they're ever going to give him a shot again. I don't care whether it's at 35. I don't care whether it's at 45. I believe truly Aljamain Sterling, unless it's some short notice opportunity where someone gets injured and Aljamain Sterling's fighting on the card, I don't believe that Aljamain Sterling ever sniffs a UFC title shot again in his career, whether it be at bantamweight or whether it be at featherweight. I don't think the UFC will ever take that risk to potentially have Aljamain Sterling as a UFC champion again. It's the same situation with Tyron Woodley from years ago. The UFC didn't really like him, wasn't super promotable. Once he lost the belt, now he never even made, strung together some wins to even get that potential title shot. But you could tell they were happy that Woodley was gone. They desperately wanted him to lose to Darren Till, a fight before he end up actually losing the belt. But I think it's the same thing with Aljamain Sterling. I would say I'm 95% sure Aljamain Sterling will never get another title shot in his UFC career. Moving on to my first actual takeaway, number 3 on the list, and that is that Chris Weidman needs to retire immediately. Chris Weidman, he returns from a catastrophic injury, looked absolutely atrocious. And I was rooting for him in this fight. I wanted him to win this fight. I wanted him to have a successful return. He looked like literal garbage. Now, Chris Weidman was already on the decline before he snapped his leg. He was getting finished like every single fight, basically. I mean, he's taken so much damage. Luke Rockhold, that TKO in the title fight was horrific. The Yoel Romero flying knee, the Gegard Mousasi knees. I mean, there's just so many examples. Dominic Reyes, I'm not going to name them all, but Chris Weidman took a lot of brain damage before he ever snapped his leg. He was already on the decline. Then he snaps his leg against Uriah Hall, sits out for almost 2.5 years, and he returns against Brad Tavares, who isn't even ranked in the middleweight division. And Weidman's like, I'm going to start my title run again. He's 39 years old. He looks unbelievably slow in this fight. He took a lot of damage. Supposedly, he tore some type of ligament in his knee, whether it's an ACL, MCL, we don't know yet. Dana White said that's what the doctor's early prognosis was, so we'll see if we get that confirmed this week. But he probably requires knee surgery, probably going to be out for a while. And on top of that, the broken leg, or the formerly broken leg, looked horrible in this fight. It looked weird. I mean, I don't know if anyone can confirm this. They felt this way too. Let me know down in the comments. But the way he was moving, his mobility was severely compromised, and it almost looked like he was dragging that back leg behind him. And you could tell he was nervous as hell to throw it. He did not want to throw that kick at all. I know he talked a big game before the fight, saying, I'm going to go out there and throw a really hard leg kick. He was switching stances to throw body kicks with the healthy leg. And then that healthy leg was getting chewed up badly. Now, he took a lot of leg kicks on the formerly broken leg, and he was checking a lot of leg kicks with that leg as well. So maybe it was just a mind hurdle. But even if it was, I don't even think let's say a 20% increase to Chris Weidman's performance, I don't think he even belongs in the top 15, even with a 20% boost. That's a significant boost. So I think really Chris Weidman's taken so much damage in terms of brain damage. He's taken a lot of leg damage. He had a return. He showed that, okay, I'm not going out on this catastrophic injury. And I think it's really time for him to retire. I don't want to watch him. The UFC, we've seen what they do with these veterans. They allow the roster to chew them up and spit them out, which is the nature of the business. I don't want to see Weidman just get fed to up-and-coming killers, just getting slaughtered by up-and-coming killers so they can say, oh yeah, I got a former middleweight champion on my resume. Because Weidman, the Weidman that became middleweight champion many, many years ago, I believe it was like 10 years ago or 11 years ago, that's not even close to the 39-year-old Weidman we have today with compromised legs and the brain damage that he's occurred over his last few fights. And I just really, really, really want to see Chris Weidman retire. I wasn't sure that was going to be the case going in. I thought maybe he comes back, he looks better than ever. I thought that was highly unlikely. But after watching the fight against Brad Tavares, watching him get chewed up, watching the wrestling looked abysmal, which was his bread and butter for so many years, I need to see Chris Weidman retire. Moving on to my number 2 takeaway, and that is that Ian Garry is legit. And going into this fight, I didn't love the matchup against Neil Magny. I wanted to see the Jeff Neal fight because I thought Jeff Neal was a more substantial test. But I do believe we got some answers to some questions with this fight because Neil Magny, even though he's not particularly the elite of the elite, he is the gatekeeper for the top 10. And I know he stepped in on short notice, but Ian Garry, I know he's getting a lot of criticism because he did not finish Neil Magny. But he went out there and made Neil Magny look like he was some bum on the street. He absolutely demolished Neil Magny in his fight. Chewed up his legs, chewed up his body, lit him up on the feet, landed front kicks to the face, beat him badly. Just absolutely demolished him. Now, could he get the finish? No, he couldn't get the finish. I thought there was multiple times that Keith Peterson could have stepped in from leg kick damage alone. But he went for the finish, and he dominated. Honestly, I would have no problem with, I think one judge gave Ian Garry 3 10-8s. Now, I wouldn't necessarily do that. I think I had 2 10-8s for Ian Garry, but nonetheless, he proved that he's very strong in the grappling. I know he was cheating a bit with the grappling as well, with the arm over the cage and interlocking the fingers in the cage, but he proved that he's very salvageable in the grappling. He proved again that his striking is really good, and he proved that he has good cardio when he has significant output. We've seen guys where they get into a fight like that, where they have to put out a lot of strikes. There's a lot of output, and Ian Garry threw a lot of strikes in this fight. I don't know exactly what the numbers were. I don't really trust the stats anyway. There was a lot of output here, and Ian Garry still looked pretty fresh in the third round. He was going for the finish up until the last 15 seconds. So I think Ian Garry really proved that he belongs in the top 10 of the welterweight division, and I think it's beautiful because we need some fresh meat at welterweight. Ian Garry's willing to fight anyone. And you have the rest of the welterweight division. Oh, I don't want to fight this guy. I don't want to fight that guy. I'm not fighting this guy. You know, Wonder Boy doesn't want to fight anyone. You know, he only wants a hand-selected opponent on the second Tuesday of November and this and blah, blah, blah. There's so many guys at welterweight, so many older welterweights who've just been clogging up the division, refusing to fight people, sitting out in witness protection. And I think it's beautiful that we're finally getting an influx of some new blood in the welterweight division. And Garry showed that he has the stamina to compete with those guys. He showed at least he has decent enough grappling to out-grapple a guy like Neil Magny. And he went out there and put on a world-class performance, in my opinion. Again, it's against Neil Magny, so I don't want to get too over-exaggeratory. I don't want to exaggerate the performance because it was against Neil Magny on short notice. But forget about the level of opponent. You can look at certain guys and the way they perform. I talked about this with Islam Makhachev. People were clowning on him for beating Bobby Green, but look at the level of dominance he did when he beat Bobby Green. Look at the level of dominance he had when he beat other guys. And I said, look, he's not fighting the best competition, but the performances speak for themselves regardless of the level of competition. And Ian Garry went out there, put on a masterclass performance, showed us some skills that we didn't necessarily know about in terms of his grappling and his stamina. And I think he really does belong in the top 10 of the welterweight division. And I think he is a legit contender in the welterweight division. And I can't wait to see who he fights next. Preferably a top 10 opponent. Doesn't look like it's going to be Wonderboy Thompson. He doesn't want to fight anyone. But I'm really interested to see who the UFC matches Ian Garry with up next. Moving on to my number one takeaway from UFC 292. And this is kind of twofold because I already kind of knew one of these, but the second one, I think a lot of people might actually disagree with me on, but it is Sean O'Malley is a world-class fighter. I already kind of knew that, but I wasn't completely sold on it. But two, I believe that Sean O'Malley could go on a run at bantamweight. After watching the performance he put on against Aljamain Sterling, I think Sean O'Malley can beat Merab Dvalishvili. Now, I don't know if that fight's actually going to happen, but I think if Sean O'Malley comes out against Merab kind of fights in a similar style to Aljo. Obviously, the stamina is a little bit better. Obviously, he's a little bit more relentless, but he leaves his chin wide open as well. So I could see Sean O'Malley, I could see a world where Sean O'Malley brutally KOs Merab Dvalishvili. I can see a world where Sean O'Malley beats Corey Sandhagen. That's another very interesting fight. I can see a world where Sean O'Malley could beat Petr Yan. Now, I thought he lost the last fight. I thought it was a robbery. But nonetheless, Sean O'Malley's improving from fight to fight. He's still very, very young. And up until this point, really up until last year, he hadn't fought any good competition. The only good fighter he really fought was Marlon Vera. He lost that fight. And he fought Petr Yan. He proved himself as an elite fighter, but he still lost the fight in most people's eyes. And then people played revisionist history with it. But nonetheless, at UFC 292, he put on a phenomenal performance. He stops Aljamain Sterling, who appeared on paper to be a nightmare matchup. Now looking back at it, I feel like Sean O'Malley's a nightmare matchup for Aljamain Sterling. I would have never thought a week ago, I'd be saying, yeah, I think Sean O'Malley can beat Merab. I would have never thought that a week ago. Sean O'Malley can beat Corey Sandhagen. I don't think I would have said that a week ago. Now, that one would have been a little bit closer a week ago. But nonetheless, he proved in this fight that, I mean, he's a world-class fighter. He proved in this fight he has amazing fight IQ. He proved in this fight he is an ever-evolving fighter. And his resume now, I've talked about it, it's one of the worst resumes ever. But now you look at it and you put it in context. In back-to-back fights, he defeated Petr Yan. Doesn't matter what I think. The judges' scorecard scored it for him. And now he beat Aljamain Sterling. So he's the UFC bantamweight champion. And I really do believe he can beat Aljamain Sterling. All bets are off. Because most of these guys that you look at for the rest of the division outside of Merab are going to try to strike with O'Malley. O'Malley's one of the best strikers in the division, if not the best striker in the division. And he's already beat a guy who, Aljamain Sterling, who was supposedly the nightmare matchup, who was going to be the guy that's going to drag him to the ground and submit him. And he went out there, the footwork looked incredible, the speed looked incredible, the athleticism looked incredible, and the accuracy looked incredible. I think he's probably the most accurate striker in the bantamweight division, but in the UFC in general, he's definitely top 5 most accurate strikers in the UFC. The way he pinpointed those ground and pound shots to really finish off Aljamain Sterling was incredible. And I really think a lot of people are going to say, oh, he's going to lose to Merab, he's going to lose to Sandhagen. I think he can win those fights. Now, I do think those matchups are very interesting, and I'm not even committing to picking Sean O'Malley, but I think a lot of people are going to act as if, oh, O'Malley would get blown out in this fight. The fight that honestly interests me the most is Corey Sandhagen, because he has the grappling that he's improving on, but also he has the striking as well. So he's kind of more of, you know, he can have a mixed game plan against somebody like Sean O'Malley, similar to Petr Yan. And honestly, the fight I'm dying for, I want to see Sean O'Malley versus Petr Yan too for the bantamweight title. Who doesn't want to see that rematch? I'm dying to see that rematch now. Get Petr Yan a win, give him a title shot, depending on where the division is at that point in time. But Sean O'Malley proved himself as one of the best. He's now going to go down in history as an undisputed UFC champion. And I think UFC 292 might have been his star-making performance. There was a lot of talk going in this fight. Sean O'Malley's a star, and that's kind of another takeaway. Sean O'Malley's a star, and it's kind of like selling wolf tickets. Like, they're acting like Sean O'Malley's more popular than he actually is. Even though he is a popular fighter, he's not some massive draw. I think this performance against Aljamain Sterling can really propel him up that ladder. I think if he wins one more fight in phenomenal, in a phenomenal way, where he gets a crazy KO or a viral KO or a viral finish, I think Sean O'Malley is really going to propel himself into stardom, maybe like an Israel Adesanya level stardom. Because right now, I don't know, they don't release the pay-per-view numbers. Dana White's saying it did really well, but he says that about every pay-per-view. I think right now, a lot of people are calling Colby Covington a draw. We know Colby Covington, even against a bigger draw, sells less than 400,000 pay-per-view buys. I would be willing to guess, I think Sean O'Malley's selling better than Colby Covington. So I know a lot of people have a warped description of draw. For me right now, Sean O'Malley's like a mid-tier guy. He's like a mid-tier pay-per-view seller. He can main event pay-per-views. He's not a guy that's going to sit at co-main event, but he's not like an Israel Adesanya, or to take the next layer up like a John Jones, and to take another layer up Conor McGregor. He's not that big, massive star, but the UFC's really getting behind him. And if he continues to put on fights like this and performances like this, he will become a star, because even though he lacks a little bit of personality, the way he fights, I think, is really what can sell him to a casual audience. And plus he's young, plus he's always, being kind of weird online and always promoting himself, smoking weed and all this stuff, and the cornrows that are all tie-dye different colors. And the UFC is targeting a young male demographic, and people like that stuff. So I think if Sean O'Malley can continue to win, he can become an Israel Adesanya level star, if not bigger. Now, I wouldn't commit to that just yet, and I think this is just one building block on that potential, future for Sean O'Malley. But I think he absolutely needed this win against Aljamain Sterling. Otherwise, if Aljo was to go out there, ragdoll him, and submit him, I think Sean O'Malley's just a bottom of the barrel, not bottom of the barrel, but like barely off the bottom in terms of adding pay-per-view value to a card, which is what I consider when I talk about a pay-per-view or a star or a draw, however you want to phrase it. If he would have lost to Aljo, there would have been close to nothing. He would have just been popular on social media. He really wouldn't have moved any pay-per-views. But nonetheless, UFC 292, we've really learned a lot. Let me know if there's anything I missed. Let me know if there's anything you agree with. Let me know if there's anything you disagree with down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.